All right, so we're halfway through the semester, and as promised earlier, we were working on a project together where half of the project was going to be implemented in one framework, and the other half of the project was going to be implemented in a different framework. Right? The first half of the semester we worked on being able to implement an application useful for faculty to be able to create their own content, right? Create courses, modules, widgets, and they had full-blown access to create content themselves. Yes, and for that we use the stack. We used React for the front end. We used Java for the middle tier, and MySQL for the persistent storage. Yes, and so from now on and for the rest of the semester, we're going to focus on the second half of that same project, but viewed from the point of view of the student. Right? So the student is going to want to be able to consume the content, the same courses, right? The same modules, the same widgets. They want to be able to consume this content, right? But they're going to have mostly just read-only access. Yes, they're not going to be able to create courses, remove modules, or move around any widgets, right? They're only going to be able to consume the content. Make sense? Right? So the same data set. So there's going to be the same Java middle tier. It's going to provide the same data, but it's this new application. We're going to build it using a different stack. We're going to use for the front end. We're going to use Angular. Right? For the middle tier, we're going to be using Node.js, and for a database, we're going to be using MongoDB. Okay? And together, it spells mean, the mean stack. Right? M for Mongo, E for Express, A for Angular, and N for Node.js. Okay? Although Express is kind of a Node.js module, so it's like Node twice in there. Anyway, it's the mean stack. It's very popular. So we're going to focus first on the front end part, which is the Angular portion of this, and that's what it's going to be our first lecture today. Right? So Angular is a little bit harder to get into than React. That's why I left it for later. Although my hope is that having understood what single page applications is, now that we know what a service is, now that we know what a component is, now that we know all these navigation, right? So we understood all these concepts. All those concepts are transferable to Angular, right? Those are the same concepts. The only difference is that it's a different syntax, but it's the same concepts, right? It's just that it's different, different idiosyncrasies, yes? But it's the same concept. So I don't have to explain any of that, right? Hopefully, and so we can focus on just looking at the syntax is slightly different, okay? And one of the challenges with Angular is that perhaps it tries to do too much, right? Whereas React is purely a library for dynamic DOM manipulation, right? Angular goes much farther than that. Now, it's not only a library for dynamic rendering of content, it also forces you into a specific way of thinking of how applications are architected. Okay? It forces you to think in the model view control design pattern, right? That these are very well defined roles, yes, and you don't mix and match these things, right? For instance, React was pretty loose about mixing logic and state and rendering in the same component, yes, right? There was no distinction. There was only the convention that we were following that containers were responsible for maintaining state, right? For fetching data and handling any events, yes? But then it passed this data to a component who actually did the rendering, correct? But that was mostly convention, right? Where we split those two roles, right, into stateful and stateless components and whatnot, yes? But it was just our choice, and it was a good choice, right? It's folks follow this kind of convention in real industry. But here in Angular, that's the only choice. There's no way to mix and match. There's no, it forces you to think in controllers and templates, right? Views and components, right? You have the logic separate from the rendering, right? And that's the only way that you can go. As opposed to React, it's just a convention. In Angular, it's the only way. Okay? It forces you to do that. Other things such as accessing data. In React, we created singleton services, yes, where we encapsulated all the data access that went out to the server and fetch data and whatnot. It was the last assignment that we had, but React didn't really play any role in there, right? It was just us creating classes and singletons and statics and whatnot. It was a convention for us. Right? In Angular, it is a design pattern, right? It provides the various abstractions that allow you to create these kinds of singletons, right? And these instances are then used all throughout the application, right? Additionally, it introduces quite a few other abstractions that are very common in server-side development and enterprise application development that are just not available anywhere else. Like for instance, we have injection, inversion of control, factory patterns. So a lot of the design patterns that became very popular and were very successful on the server side, for many years. Java and .NET have been using these design patterns for decades, yes, and they were very successful. And so a lot of those same ideas that were very successful then are finding their way into client-side development. Okay, and Angular is just one of these examples, one of these libraries, one of these frameworks that provides all these kinds of abstractions. Yes, so it's a much larger thing, right? It's a much larger thing to learn. But my hope is that having understood many of these concepts from React, you'll be able to just jump in and just learn the syntax and how different you do some of these syntax. Make sense? Right? So we're going from convention into you're forced to do it this way. Okay? So developers perhaps felt a little bit too constrained, right? Saying that, oh, you're forcing me to do it this one way, and if you stray away from the corral, the framework starts working against you. Okay, so you have to stay within the walled garden. Okay. All right, so Angular. Right, so what is Angular? So it's an open source platform. It uses the language TypeScript. Right, yet another language to learn. So TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript. Right, if you've been writing JavaScript, you've been writing TypeScript. So any JavaScript file is also a TypeScript file, right? But it adds a whole bunch of other abstractions such as classes, interfaces, imports. A lot of the same things that we've been seeing in ES6, right, are also available in TypeScript. Yes. Plus, it has public, protected, private, and static, a whole bunch of really cool things that we were missing. Okay, so it introduces a lot of what you would expect in object-oriented programming. Strong typing. That's another great feature where you can now declare variables to be of string, of arrays of whatever, right? You can create your own classes and then say that your particular variable is a particular type, right? So it can do all this strong typing, right, which we don't have in JavaScript. Generics. It also enforces the architectural design pattern of the model view controller, okay? Which we sort of have been following all along in React, right? Where we were splitting the model or the handling of events and state management. We were putting that in containers. Yes. We then moved over to reducers. Right? So the reducers and the containers and the providers. That was pretty much our model. Right? Handling all the data, the data flow and the data manipulation, the mutation of that data. And And then we had the components, right? The stateless components, which pretty much were our view, right? That were their only role was to just render the content. Just give me the content, I'll render it, right? And Angular makes a much more dramatic stance on this, and separates these two worlds apart. It says, no, this is only the view, and this is only the controller, right? Where the view is only going to be HTML, right, and the controller is only going to be TypeScript, right? There is no mix and match, right? As opposed to in React, where you're free to mix and match, and embed one instead of the other, even though we tended to separate them. Yes, right? Angular makes a very strong stance about this, right? It says no, they're separate, right? They don't mix and match. Yeah, so learning Angular is definitely a steeper learning curve than React. But again, hopefully, having covered many of these ideas of components and services and templates and whatnot, learning Angular will be easier, hopefully. All right, so where we start is pretty much the way we did in React, right? We first installed a command line interface. In React, it was the Create React App. Right? Same thing in Angular. We're also going to install a command line interface. The command line is called ng for Angular, and then we can use this command ng for all sorts of things. Right? In Create React App, the only thing we used it was to create the boilerplate project. We have to get started, and then never again. Here, the ng command is a little more nuanced. It has quite a few other commands. We're going to use it for creating new applications, new projects, creating any new components, right? The boilerplate for any new component. We're going to use it for building, for running, for testing, right? So the ng command line interface will be a little more involved. Okay, so this is going to install the ng command line, right? It'll make it available, and it's the Angular command line interface, which I believe I already have. And then we can create a brand new application by using the ng new. So ng new, and here's ng new hello world. Yes. Yes, it'll be separate repos. At the end, we're going to end up with 4 repos, right? 2 front end and 2 middle tiers. And so, yes. Yeah, so npm install -g @angular/CLI. Bless you. So we can create a brand new project saying ng new hello world. Then we can go in there, and we can either type npm start, like we did for React, or we can say ng serve. ng serve will call npm start, right? Plus, if you say --open, it'll open it up into a browser, and then it'll make it available, right? It'll do the same thing that Node does, right? The same thing that React does. React, what it does is that it takes all your JavaScript, all your JSX that it's written in ES6 and JSX, right? The embedded HTML, and it compiles it down into JavaScript, right? Into JavaScript that all browsers can understand. Here, it's going to do the same thing, right? It's going to take all the TypeScript, right? It's going to compile it down into JavaScript that all browsers could understand, right? And then it's going to serve the resulting application. It'll serve it in a local Node.js instance. Same thing as React, right? It'll compile it and then we'll serve it with a Node.js server. So even though we haven't touched Node.js, we are using Node.js, right? But we'll talk about Node.js in much more detail next week. So it starts up, and it opens it up, and by default, the development version of the local project runs on port 4200. Just like React runs on 3000, Spring Boot runs on 8080. The Angular runs on 4200. Okay, and then it displays the default, the boilerplate Angular application here. Okay.
All right, so let's just talk a little bit about the way Angular likes to break up an application. You know, just like in React, all these libraries use the abstraction component. Okay, component, referring to any self-contained modular element that can be rendered on some screen, right? And that it has a tag or HTML tag associated with it, right? And the way you did it in React is that you created a class, and the name of the class was the tag, correct? Right? And here is almost the same. Same thing. We're going to create a class, but the name of the class is not going to be exactly the same. The name of the tag. You can vary. You can say what tag you want. Right? What tag do you want to use? You can configure the tag that you want to use. Yes. But it's the same idea. Right? The same idea. It's a self-contained, reusable element that has some graphical representation on a screen. In React, it was just that one class, and that's it. In Angular, it goes a little further. A component is split up into 4 different pieces, each one with its own specific role. Right? A component has at least 2 pieces, right, that really we care about. Right? One of them is the view. Right? What am I going to render? Right? What is the HTML that eventually I'm going to render, right, as a template? So this is a template that I'm going to use to render, and then there is the controller, right, written in TypeScript, right, that encapsulates all the logic, right? Does all the event handling, does all the manipulation of the data. It also might even go fetch something from a server. The service comes back with the data and somehow sends it back to the view for rendering. Yes. Right, so these 2 files in React, we would create 2 components. Yes. It would be a stateful container component, and then we would have a stateless component. Yes, right? Both of them React components. Right? There was no distinction in the implementation, but here, this is strictly going to be an HTML file, and it is strictly going to be a TS file, right? And they play the role of the view and the controller. So it's split up into 2 different files. You could, perhaps, if this were tiny, you could embed this inside of TS, right? But it's not considered good practice. Right? Maybe if it's like a really, really simple thing to do, right? As a really small component, perhaps you might embed this in here as a string, right? And but that's usually not considered good practice. Yes.
Is TS here interchangeable for JavaScript?
Sorry?
Is TS here interchangeable for JavaScript?
It's a superset of JavaScript. It's TypeScript. Yeah, so it's a language which is a superset of JavaScript, meaning it takes any JavaScript that's also TypeScript, plus it adds a whole bunch of things. Right? Maybe like C# or C++. Right? C++ is C with a whole bunch of object-oriented stuff. Right? So same thing. So TypeScript is JavaScript plus objects. Okay. And optional, strong typing, where you can declare a variable of a particular type. Plus, components also contain, optional styling that is specific to that one component, and also any test harness that you would have for testing that one component independently, right? That you can test whether it's behaving correctly. All right. All right. Awesome. So to create a component, you can either do it by hand, right, from your web storm. You can say new, and you can create a brand new TypeScript file. So you can do it by hand, but I don't suggest that you do it by hand. Right? I'm only going to show it once, just so that you see the process. But this is not what I recommend. But only so you go through this painful process once and then never again. You're just like you learned how to add when you were little, and then we gave you a calculator. So we're going to do it by hand, but then what we're going to do from now on, we're just going to use the ng command line interface. Yes? We say ng, I want a new component, and it builds the component for us. All right? So we're going to do it by hand once. We can say ts, create a brand new TypeScript file, the hello world component.ts. This creates a brand new class. We're going to type in the class, export class. There's no export default. It's just export class. All right, so here's where we start seeing some syntax changes, syntax differences, but very minor. Hello world component. And we are going to implement a couple of things here. So we're going to have to import a component, just like we did in React, right? In React, we import React, comma, and then component, yes? Here we just import component, and then we can, in React, we say that we extend component, yes? In Angular, we use decorators, like in Java. You can decorate your class and say this is a component, add component. Yes, right? And notice that it has parentheses here, so you can configure your component. You can say things about your component, right? For instance, one of the things that you can configure in your component is say, what HTML element do I want? How am I going to be referred in an HTML page, right? In React, the default is just basically the name of the class. The name of the class is the name of the actual tag. Yes? Here in React, right, when you create a class and you export it, you can use the name of the class as the tag name, right? So here you can configure that. You can say no. I don't want this really long name for my tag. I want to use this as my tag. Make sense? Hello-world. And that's how you configure the selector. Other things you can say here is, what do I want to render? What do I want to render when somebody uses this tag? Right? I can specify, well, how do I render in a page? If somebody does pointy bracket, hello world, close pointy bracket, right? This is what I render. The template, hello world, and this is what it renders. So if somebody uses hello world, this is what it renders. Make sense? Right? But notice that there is no mix and match of HTML. Notice that the HTML here is explicitly a property of the template attribute here. It's not intermixed with the rest of the code. Yes? And typically this is not what we would do. We would not have the HTML here. Instead, it would be in a separate file. The HTML would be in a separate file. Yes? Right? But here's the simplest of components. We are using hello world. After we do that, we need to register our components. Right? So this is some of the plumbing. Some of the plumbing that happens in the background of how is it that we know that, and we need to tell the whole framework, hey, there's this brand new component, and anytime somebody uses a selector, I want to render it. Yes? So it needs to be plugged in. All this is going to happen automatically for us, right? We're not going to have to do this ever again, right? This is done for us automatically when we do ng. We can use the ng command line interface to do this for us instead. But we're doing it by hand, just once, just this once. There will be an app.module.ts. There would be an app.module.ts that gets created for us. In there, we import our brand new component. And we declare it. There will be an @ng module, and we can say decorations. Here's my brand new component. There will be an array. There'll already be a default component in there, and we can add any number of components here. And now it's available all throughout the framework. Wherever you do a hello world, it'll render that HTML. And then that's it. You can now go back. There is a default HTML file. This is the entry point of the application called app.component.html. Right? And in there, you can say hello world. Right? And it renders our HTML. Make sense? Yes? Sorry, say again? Oh yeah.
Getting a message for that. Do we want to do that?
Yes, yes, you do. And then it renders into the hello world. Okay. Again, you would not do this by hand, right? Instead, you would use the ng command to do this, right? And let's do that next.